Welcome back to our study in our connections and what connects us here at Marsh Corner. We're looking at our core values. We've discussed several of those already. Today we're going to look at two additional core values that make Marsh Corner who we are. These are the things that are the non-negotiables, the things that drive us as a church and make us who we are. The first of those core values that we want to look at today is a core value that we say that we are redeemed by grace. Now, when I say redeemed by grace, I say that that's something in which we find unity. You see, grace is God's blessing to us. It is that God showed us favor when we didn't deserve favor. Grace is different from mercy in that mercy is God showing us favor and meeting our needs in a very specific way. Whereas grace is that God says, there's nothing that I can do to save myself. Grace says that there's nothing that I can do to change my situation. Grace is God saying, I am powerless and I am unable to do and restore myself. We understand that from a very specific verse in Ephesians chapter 2. It says that it's by grace that you are saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It's the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Now, it's not works. That's a key ingredient. When we say that we're redeemed by grace, we identify that I can't do anything to actually save myself. There are other denominations, other churches, other organizations, if you will, out there calling themselves Christians. And what they do is they try to put themselves into grace. They try to do works of grace, which just kind of strikes as being almost like government assistance or parking on a driveway and driving on a parkway. It just doesn't make sense to say that I am going to do works of grace. There aren't things that we can do by its very definition to work grace in our lives. Grace is something that God gives me when I didn't deserve it. Now that's important because it unites us. No one comes into a church, no one becomes a member of a church, no one participates in the work of a church based upon their abilities, their strengths, their character. I'm a better church person because I am just, I can speak better, or I'm a better church person because I have money. No, we're all united by a single concept, and that is that every single one of us is redeemed by grace. Paul has that in mind when he says in Ephesians chapter 4 that there is one body and one spirit, just as you are called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. We are one because God has called us, not because we have called ourselves. Grace unites us. Now, grace unites us, and it takes us a step further, and that is, it not only gives me a singular salvation, grace also gives me a common forgiveness. One of the things that drives a church and should drive a church is this understanding that we are forgiven by God's grace. God didn't save me because of who I was. In fact, God didn't even save me because of what I would be. God saved me where I was, and He is taking me into a great place. In the same way God has forgiven me, I need to express that forgiveness to others. I need to show grace. God says that grace is how I restore other people and I build them up and I show them love. There's a verse in 1 Corinthians that says that there are all kinds of wicked people in our world. And Paul says to the Corinthian church, and such were some of you, but God saved you. There is this recognition in the concept of grace that we have all been forgiven from great things. We have all been forgiven from a very terrible place. That God has restored us. And because of that, here's this concept that unites us. And that is that I not only have been shown grace, but I also need to show grace. I need to be a forgiver. I need to see people in my congregation and people who are around me in my small group and say, God has forgiven them just as he's forgiven me. Isn't that awesome? I have a common forgiveness. Paul says to the Galatian church that they are to exercise that forgiveness and to develop and encourage others in the congregation in grasping hold of this idea of being redeemed by grace. Here's what he says. He says this in Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. He says, brothers, if anyone is caught up in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness, keeping watch over yourselves, lest you too be tempted. So grace unites us. It brings us into the family of God through one singular common way, and then it binds us together in the family of God by demonstrating it over and over and over again to those who are around us. Now that is a core value at Marsh Corner. We believe that men and all of us in our church have been redeemed by grace. Now there is a second core value that I want to just touch on with you. And that second core value is that we're rejoicing in community. You see, community is where we find security. God has not called us to be lone wolves. God actually describes us this way over and over and over again. He calls us sheep. You know what's interesting is that sheep do their best when they are together with other sheep. God wants us to be together. God wants us to do things together. I mentioned that there is this difference in worship, in this idea that in the Old Testament, maybe you came to worship and you worshiped by yourself in a big room. There is an idea that some people have that they can worship wherever they want to be because all they have to do is be alone. But God has not called us to be alone. God has called us to live in community. God has called us sheep. He wants us together, and he wants us to be united in one single specific way, to be close to one another and to be united. So here's the thing about living in community. There are things that you as a believer in Jesus Christ can only do when you're in a church. In fact, there are 59 commandments in the New Testament. 59 of them. And all of those commandments are things that you can only do in a local church. They are very important. They're very significant. They're actually identified in the New Testament. They're actually identified in the New Testament by one Greek word that we translate as one another. So there are 59 one another passages in the New Testament. Maybe you, as a small group today, will just go to your concordance and pull up those 59 one another passages. It's things like, I need to love one another. I need to restore one another. I need to, one of my favorites from Hebrews, to encourage one another while it's still called today. I have all of these responsibilities to do and to carry out in community. How about this one? Greet one another with a holy kiss. That's the idea of you need to actually make physical contact with one another. You need to be willing to put yourself into a place where you are connecting to other people and other Christians. God says that that's part of our community. We express ourselves and we encourage one another and we develop one another and we live with one another. Here's another idea that comes out of that community concept. It's an Old Testament idea. It's from the book of Proverbs. It says that as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Folks, if you're living outside of community, if you think you don't need a local church, if you think that you can actually set the standards or the rules about how that local church connects to you, then really you're just an iron implement sitting out in the rain, allowing rust to take away your sharpness. When you're in a local church, you are interacting with one another. You are worshiping with one another. You are approaching God together with others. You are connecting one to another. And yeah, you know what? There are sparks. There are difficulties. There are times when people are just going to rub you the wrong way in a local church. And that's good because those people are making you sharp. All right. Take some time together in your small group right now and think about these two concepts. The idea of being redeemed by grace, how grace has been shown to you and how you can show grace to others. And then think also about some of this idea of rejoicing in community. How do I become part of this local community? In fact, you're in a small group right now, so you even have a smaller community where you are actively involved with others. How do you encourage one another today? Maybe even go around the room and say a word of encouragement about every single person in your room, in your small group. Take the opportunity to be a community today because that's a core value of our church. And may God bless you as you study together.